Hey everyone, it's Zach Wright, founder of Grapevine Software, and this is this week's Future of Work Weekly Report, where we discuss the hottest headlines and trending topics happening in the future of work. Anything from remote, flexible, hybrid, AI, productivity. We're going to bring it at your front door. We're going to read it. We're going to digest it. We're going to analyze it. Sometimes we get a little deep into it, but today is no different. We're going to be looking at the great employee experience in 2025 hinges on making work less chaotic. That's the title of this article that we're going to be reviewing. It's coming from Unleash, and the data is actually from a Qualtrics survey. So they surveyed 35,000 workers globally to discover the employee experience trends for 2025. So we're looking ahead right now. And some of the things that they talk about is maybe something that we already know, but I want to dive into some details there. So we have 4 highlights that we're going to discuss, and let's go ahead and get to it right now. So highlight number 1, rising engagement versus attrition risk. So the key insight here from this article and the survey results is employee engagement has reached an all-time high, but high attrition remains a pressing concern, especially among younger workers who are engaged yet planning to leave within a few years. Some of the statistics that they talk about here is engagement is up 5 points since 2021. I want to make sure that that's right because I thought it was 3, but yes, okay. It's up 5 points since 2021, but the intent to stay is declining. They also say 56% of new employees plan to leave within 3 years, compared to 34% of tenured employees. So what I want to call out here is that engagement is measured on a different level. And what I mean by that is engagement can come through autonomy. It can come through the individual and the work that they're doing. And then attrition is more so attached to your relationship with your manager, your connection to the culture, your connection to the purpose of the company. And so we're weighing 2 different things here. So it is a little bit surprising to see that employee engagement is higher. It's at an all-time high, but it's not necessarily shocking to see that these things are conflicting with one another, because even though the employee engagement is high, that could be because we have more individualized work, or it could mean that we're hiring more freelancers, or whatever the case is. It could just mean that the type of work that people are able to do, or that the work that they're given, is more engaging. They care about it a little bit more than they did in the past. But at the same time, the attrition risk is, in my opinion, it didn't necessarily say this in the article, but in my opinion, it's due to the lack of connection to culture, the people in the organization, and the purpose of the organization. And so what we're really seeing here, again, this part that I'm talking about is my opinion. I believe that with remote work and flexible work and distributed teams, companies are missing out on the vibes. I know that's not a metric, but the vibes that they used to experience in the office, which would make them think twice about leaving, because they had that best friend at work that they didn't want to leave because then they wouldn't be able to work together, right? Or they had that promotion that was coming up. That's not necessarily a remote or hybrid thing, but the point is that that identity that you had whenever you were in the office is a challenge that remote and hybrid workforces face. And that is one of the reasons that we're building Grapevine. It's not the only reason. It's just the outcome that a lot of companies experience whenever they use Grapevine. Because one, you can customize your feel, your look and feel of Grapevine to match your brand, to add in your logo, and then also build that culture around your team. And you get to know people more with our employee profiles, right? This is not a promotion of Grapevine, but this is what I actually think is happening, is that identity of the company and being a part of that company is harder to produce in an organization that is remote or hybrid without a tool like Grapevine. It doesn't have to be Grapevine, but that's specifically one of the reasons why we're building it, to have that home. But I think that is what is really going on here, is that the work is still intriguing and they're still able to engage in it, and they're able to get that deep work possibly, or they have this project that's tough and they want to be able to complete it, but they don't have the attachment to their team, that workplace bestie, or that company as a whole, right? And so we need ways to overcome that or replace that if you are going to be working remotely or hybrid. Now, they didn't say that they only let me just double check. Yeah, they didn't say that they only interviewed or surveyed people in remote, distributed, or in office. So we're just assuming that this is encapsulating everyone. Now, let's go to highlight number 2, which is chaos in the workplace and the need for simplicity. So the key insight here is the workplace has become more chaotic post-pandemic, with 38% of employees saying they feel pressured due to the rapid pace of change. Reducing complexity is now essential for sustainable productivity and employee well-being. They say 1 in 3 employees feel pressured to be more productive, and then 38% attribute this pressure to the accelerated pace of change at work. I wish that they would have gone in, and maybe the survey does, but I wish that they would have gone into the details of what do they mean by the accelerated pace of change at work. Is it the actual work? Is it the environment of the work? Is it the advancement in technology with AI? What is it that is accelerating the pace of work? I'm assuming that AI comes in there, but they don't necessarily say it for us to get a full grasp on it. But if we just look at the chaos in the workplace and the need for simplicity, if I'm thinking about it, and obviously my mind is tainted with what we're building and the problems that we're solving, so that's where I'm going to go. I think whenever it talks about chaos in the workplace, there's a few things that are here. So this isn't where I was going, but let's start here. Employee layoffs, return to office mandates, reduction in force due to AI being developed. Like, these things I think are coming into play, and they are serious concerns, which could be another reason why attrition risk or attrition is higher as well, because they fear that if they stay and they get comfortable, then they're going to get blindsided, right? But for the chaos in the workplace, I think that could also be a factor here too. Now, where I was going to go is the factor that for the longest time, especially with SaaS or software as a service products, we started decentralizing a lot of tools, right? So the sales team had their own set of tools, the engineering team have their own set of tools, the HR team has their own set of tools. All these things meant that we had more tools. Not all of them are talking together. The departments are being siloed, and the reduction of centralized platforms like what we're building at Grapevine, they make it more complex because somebody might have a document over here. Somebody might be using a project management tool over here. Somebody might be using this communication channel. Somebody might be using email. Somebody might be, you get the point. So I think the complexity is kind of on ourselves. And if we did an evaluation of all the tools that we have, we might be able to find where we can cross lap. But at the same time, we're building tools like Grapevine, so you don't have to do that. You can bring it into Grapevine, or you can use Grapevine by itself. And so I think that that is some of it. Now, the other part is the legalities, right? Whenever you work or hire remote workers, there is a sense of complexity. Luckily, there's companies out there that help. I think Remote, Velocity, Deal, maybe not. Don't quote me on that one. But there are some complexities out there, as well as the EU just announced that, and I think Australia as well, they announced that you have the right to ask for flexible work. So there's all these different nuances that are coming in. So I think it's a mixture of the uncertainty that is out there, the decentralization of tools, department silos, and just not being able to be connected. That's why you need Grapevine. And then the other aspect is the laws, the regulations, the changes. I think that's what they're talking about here. And so what they really want employees from this survey is that they want that simplicity and they want to get over the chaos. So I wish that they would tell us a little bit more specifically. But they do talk about the pressure to be more productive. And the way that you do that is to, in our opinion, bring as much into one platform as possible and keep all the team members aligned. Now, I know it's harder the larger you get in an organization, but it's also difficult in distributed teams, and you have to be very intentional. And that's what we're thinking about as we build Grapevine for distributed teams. All right. Let's go to highlight number 3, trust and human-centered leadership. So the key insight here is that trust between employees and leaders remain crucial, but only 56% of employees believe their leaders will prioritize well-being over short-term gains. Building trust requires transparent communication and employee-centered leadership. The stats here are 56% of employees, we might have just read this, but employees feel their leaders act with integrity, but doubt they will prioritize their well-being. Organizations that focus on simplicity and partnership foster greater trust and engagement. That's exactly what we're trying to build at Grapevine. So you basically take the environment and the foundation that we've put into our platform, you bring it into your organization, and then that allows people to have that transparency that they're talking about, better communication, and to lead with an employee-centered leadership style, because you understand who they are a little bit further, again, with our employee profiles, and just being able to engage on the community newsfeed. So but this is important because it's not just a remote or a hybrid or an in-office thing. This is something that I constantly talk about whenever people say that we're returning to the office for culture. Culture is not created in a space. It's created through actions and behaviors that are rewarded, right? And so we have to think about this. And now, just to go back for a second, where it says employees believe their leaders will prioritize well-being, only 56% of employees believe their leaders will prioritize well-being over short-term goals. I always wonder, like, is this a personality thing, or is it that in some cases it's a personality thing, in other cases it's a real thing? And I think that's where these surveys can get a little bit tricky, especially when we're talking about trends for the future, because somebody saying that they need to prioritize their well-being over the short-term gains might mean that a manager is asking them to stay over or work on the weekend, not every weekend, not every afternoon or night, but they're asking them because there's a project due. And in some cases, that person might be, excuse me, that person might be thinking, oh, my manager only cares about the project getting completed instead of my mental health. But in those cases, whenever there is a deadline, especially if there's a client on the other end, right? And the client can be internal, the client can be external. you have to follow through on there if you made a commitment, right? Or at least be transparent during the process. So I would like to see the breakdown or the actual question that they ask to make sure that we understand the responses here. And I think these are the types of questions that we have to ask whenever we talk about these survey outputs. And so I assume that there's some people that fit into that category, but I've also worked in environments where the environment was very toxic. The leader didn't care about your well-being and they only cared about the numbers. And maybe that was driven from the top down to them and then they drove it down to us. I can't be exactly sure the environment that I'm talking about. That's probably the case. And so this is really a cultural thing. And it might be different for each company. But if we do see, I mean, they did survey 35,000 workers globally. And so if that's the case, there is a big problem here. And we need to be able to prioritize well-being over the short-term goals because, again, that goes back to highlight number one, and that could be the reason that attrition is high because they might like doing the work and they're engaged when they do the work, but it might be who they're working for. It might be the culture they're in. There are these different variables or factors that we have to think about contributing to the outcomes of what happens to employees. And so if you're not encouraging or promoting well-being the majority of the time, then you can't expect people to jump in and help out for a short-term gain, because sometimes those are needed in business for that short-term gain without thinking about leaving later and then actually doing it, right? So that's my take on highlight number 3. We'll go ahead and go to highlight number 4, AI adoption and its impact on work. So the key insight here is employees are optimistic about AI, with nearly half using it regularly to increase productivity. However, the lack of training and guidelines poses significant risk. They say 49% of employees feel optimistic about AI in the workplace, and then 45% use AI daily or weekly, yet many do so without formal training. And I think what they're basically saying here is, I mean, AI, yes, we want to get training. We want to learn how to use it. It's going to make us more efficient, right? Whenever I first started using ChatGPT, for example, I was asking it questions and it was spitting out these different things. Now that's part the technology, but mainly it's the prompt. And so what we need to understand is that we're all learning this together. We don't necessarily need to be experts, but we could bring in somebody from the outside and teach us how to use AI. What I do for myself is I'll watch AI. I mean, I'll watch AI. I'll watch YouTube videos or I'll read an article about AI. Allie K. Miller is a great person to follow too. She's always giving tutorials out there or just posting the updates, and then you can go down the rabbit hole and learn more about it. But basically what they're saying here is that employees are actually optimistic about AI. They're not necessarily fearful that it's going to take their position, and they do think that it regularly increases their productivity. So if companies are so concerned about an employee's output and productivity, and they're actually measuring productivity and performance accurately, not butts in seats or hours in the office, but actual work that is output, then they would take the time to bring in a trainer or share videos. In Grapevine, we have a place for additional trainings, and it's just where somebody can add a video that they think an employee would be interested in learning about. So bring those in there. It's not taking away anybody's time because you can do it asynchronously where people actually just watch it on their own time. And then now they understand that training. You watch it yourself too if you're not the expert. And now everybody's just better for it. And it didn't cost anything because it was on YouTube. Just make sure you get the right one and you vet that yourself, or you bring in your engineering team if you're a tech team and have them run people through what they're doing and how to use it, how to improve it, right? There's a lot of gurus out there now, so it shouldn't be that hard. And it shouldn't cost that much. There's a lot of stuff out there. So but basically what they're saying is that they need training and guidelines. So we didn't talk about guidelines. So this is basically the same thing that we talk about with a communications charter, a work from home policy, a work from anywhere policy, flexible work policy, whatever it is. You want to set the expectations, clearly communicate it to the organization, and make sure that they understand what it is that you expect of them. For example, if you're creating a board presentation and you don't want that person to use, or let's say something different. Let's say that you're a publicly traded company and you're writing the investor relations either slide deck or the article that goes out whenever you do your earnings call. You want to, let's say that you put restrictions on AI there because you want to make sure that it's not plagiarized. You want to make sure that you're not pulling from any other company because it's public, it's very important information, and you can't afford to have an issue there. So that might be a guideline, right? And just some other things before we go, or I'll read the call outs of this episode, and then I'll go into some of the things that I think can attribute to, or some of the things that they didn't mention in the article. So summarize call outs right here. So engagement is soaring, but retention is slipping. The question is, how can organizations keep employees invested? I'm going to talk about that. Simplify work, reduce chaos, and focus on meaningful outcomes to unlock sustainable productivity. Leverage a tool like Grapevine that can help you with the trust and transparency, because those are essential to building a resilient workforce. And then you want to lead with empathy, not just numbers, and make sure that that culture approach and management approach is authentic and it's real. And then the last one is AI can transform work, but organizations must prioritize training to harness its potential safely and effectively. So that's basically what the future of work report is. But I did write down some things as I was reading the article. And so whenever it talks about attrition being high, engagement high, but attrition high as well, there's certain things, and this is actually speaking from experience. Whenever I started working, I was in a company for about 2.5 years. I left because it was a bad situation at the end, which I've talked about at length, and I won't go into it now. It's not, anyway. But the issue is that a lot of companies don't invest in their employees in a way that is enough for them to stick around. So, and that's not just the form of money, but we'll talk about that. But so when somebody leaves an organization, I saw something the other day, don't quote me on this, but somebody who stayed at the company and they received like a 3% raise over time. They got about like $10,000 in 5 years. Somebody who left the company got a 20% raise and then they got a promotion and now they're like $50,000 increase versus staying in the organization. So what we have to do as organizations, if you can, not every organization can do this, but if you can, you want to make sure that you are giving the employee what they deserve and what they've been working for, even if they don't ask for it. There's an example in the last company that I worked at. There was a great sales engineer, and he was doing a lot of work that I thought was beyond his regularly defined role. And I wasn't necessarily too technical, and he knew the product inside and out. And I thought that it was a little bit rude to not give him some type of raise with a little bit of a promotion. I knew that he didn't want to be a manager. He told me that. So I didn't try to get him into a management role, but we did get him into a lead role, and we got him a raise in his salary without him asking, right? Now I made sure that the lead part was okay and he was okay with that. And so he's still at that company. Right? We got acquired. They took him on because they knew how much they should keep him on, which is a good choice. But then in addition to that, like just being able to build a growth plan with your employees. And if those growth plans aren't there, be transparent. And because as much as you want that person to be there, you're holding them back. And I know this sounds a little bit sappy, but people only have one life, right? And so if you're selfishly keeping that person there, knowing that you can't give them everything that they deserve or want, don't hold them back, right? Don't hold them back. Let them go somewhere else or help them get into somewhere else. But maybe in the meantime, as they're looking and interviewing, have them start tapping into a coworker to kind of take over their spot and try to get their brain waves in that same way. There's a lot of things that can happen. And who knows, that person training that other person to kind of take over that spot could keep them there if that's what they wanted. So there's just different things that come to mind whenever we're talking about retention. And that's where I think being intentional about culture is the most important thing. Because if you think about culture, that is the identity of the company, and that is how people identify whenever they work at that company, right? If you ask somebody in the early days that or they told you that they worked at Tesla and they were changing the EV world, they were probably excited about that, right? So they tapped into the purpose of the company. Same thing with Facebook, whenever it was Facebook, not Meta. And maybe even now, because I do think what Meta's doing is very, very cool. And we're planning for it at Grapevine. It's way too early right now, but we will get there. But all of these things, higher salaries, promotions, cultural connection, recognition, it's the bar is so low. Unfortunately, we're trying to raise that, but the bar is so low that if you just provide recognition and give credit where credit is due, that doesn't cost anything. Just let the people in the organization understand, hey, Saad and Umair and Mohsen, they're crushing it right now. They've been crushing it this whole year. And I try to tell them, those are real people. Those are our Grapevine team. But those are the things. Those give people reason to stay. And again, engagement and reasons to stay are different. Somebody could like the work, hate the culture, right? So think about that. This is the last thing that I'll bring up, because they talked about the training. They talked about creating this employee experience. But what they didn't talk about specifically, and maybe it's because it wasn't specifically future of work related with remote or hybrid, but you have to have the ability in today's working world and working landscape. The majority of companies are distributed, whether or not they work remotely 100% or in office, whatever. The companies, the larger companies especially, they're distributed in different campuses no matter what. So they might be working different time zones. They might be working on different projects, whatever the case is. You want to give somebody the ability to self-serve. And so whenever you're doing these trainings, you can take the recording, you can put it out there. That's okay. But if it's a live training, those aren't the best. Now we have the capabilities with Fathom, Zoom AI, summaries. We have the capabilities with all these different things to get the transcript. We can ingest that transcript into ChatGPT and say, can you organize this in a linear way or a training guide way? And then if you wanted to take it a step further, you take that training guide, you ingest it into Notebook LM, and then you also can take that recording and ingest it into Notebook LM and have it do a recap. And so now you have the training in an organized fashion that is a training guide that walks people through. You can even turn it into an SOP if it makes sense for whatever training it is. You throw it into Notebook LM. Now people have the reading version, they have the audio version, and you can put that recording out there too if they wanted the recording. And now, and whenever we get Grapevine spaces, you can actually put that all in one Grapevine space and make that searchable, shareable, likable, commentable, all the ables. And it just makes it so easy. And I think that's something that we have to think about too, because whenever we think about somebody onboarding, that's where, well, I was going to say that's where their employee experience starts, but it's actually when they start talking to that first person in the interview, and maybe even before that, whenever they read the job description, the job description compared to what they're saying in the interview, does it match up? Can they trust this person? Is the culture really what they said it was? So I just stopped there. I feel like I went through the highlights pretty quickly. But that was rising engagement versus attrition risk, chaos in the workplace, and the need for simplicity, trust, and human-centered leadership, which is key, AI adoption and its impact on the work. And then I told you about how you can actually give companies more of or employees more of a reason to stay. And then also the part that we're missing with distributed teams is being able to have that self-serve training and just being able to self-serve information in the organization, which is what Grapevine helps with. All right. Thanks so much for watching watching this week's, I can't talk, so I got to stop recording. Thanks so much for watching this week's Future of Work Weekly Report, and we will see you on the next one.